Zara Mitchell's heart pounded as she climbed into the cockpit for her first solo flight. The sky stretched before her, an endless expanse of blue. But behind her, she could feel the weight of history, the weight of every doubt, every racist whisper, and every person who said she'd never belong in the cockpit. Aviation had always been a place for white men, and Zara knew it. She knew the stares, the judgment that came with being a black woman in an industry that had no place for her. But Zara was here, and no one, not even the man sitting in the seat beside her, was going to make her feel small. She could feel the tight grip of the harness, the hum of the plane's engines, and the deep rush of adrenaline in her veins. For years, she had dreamed of this moment, the moment she would take control, not just of the plane, but of her future. The moment when she would prove that she belonged here, in the skies, just as much as any other pilot. Her journey had been anything but easy. Growing up in a small, working-class neighborhood, Zara's dreams of becoming a pilot seemed impossible. There were no role models who looked like her, no one to tell her that it was okay to dream big. But her mother, a hard-working woman who had sacrificed everything to give Zara a chance at something better, had always believed in her. "You can do anything, Zara," her mother would say. "Don't let the world tell you otherwise." It was this belief that fueled Zara's ambition. Even when the world pushed back, even when it tried to box her in, she refused to back down. Flight school was where Zara first realized just how deeply rooted racism was in aviation. It was an industry dominated by white men who had grown up with privilege and opportunity. Zara was often the only black woman in the room, and it wasn't long before the subtle, and not so subtle, racist comments started. She was always asked to prove herself, always questioned, always made to feel like she was taking a seat that someone else deserved, but Zara refused to let them define her. She worked harder, studied longer, and fought to prove that she belonged. It was during her first real training flight that she encountered her biggest challenge yet. Jake, the co-pilot assigned to her, was everything Zara had expected in the world of aviation, a white, middle-aged man with decades of experience and a noticeable air of superiority. He barely acknowledged her when she climbed into the cockpit. His eyes flicked over her as though she didn't belong there. He didn't say it outright, but Zara could tell from the way he looked at her that he didn't think she was capable of handling the plane. "Just follow my lead," Jake said, his tone dismissive as they prepared for takeoff. "I'll guide you through it." Zara's hands trembled slightly as she gripped the controls. She could feel Jake's eyes on her, waiting for her to make a mistake. And if she did? She knew it would be one more excuse for him to question her, but Zara was determined to show him what she was made of. As they took off into the clear blue sky, Zara concentrated on every movement, every shift of the plane. She knew that one small mistake could cost her everything. But she wasn't about to make that mistake. Jake was quiet for the first few minutes, but the longer the flight went on, the more Zara felt the tension. He seemed to be watching her every move, waiting for her to slip. And then, it happened. Zara made a small adjustment to the altitude, a simple correction that was common in flight. Jake's voice broke the silence. "You need to be more careful with that," he said, his tone harsh. "You can't just make changes without thinking. You're not experienced enough to handle this kind of flight." Zara felt her chest tighten. She wanted to snap back, to tell him that she had worked harder than anyone to get here, that she had earned her seat in that cockpit. But she didn't. Instead, she nodded and kept her focus on the controls, pushing through the hurt. She wasn't going to let him get to her. As the flight continued, Zara felt the familiar sting of doubt creeping in. Was he right? Was she really good enough? But then she remembered her mother's words, and the fire inside her ignited once more. She wasn't here to prove Jake wrong. She was here to prove herself right. As they made their final approach, Zara took the controls with precision and confidence. She had been waiting for this moment, the moment she would show Jake and everyone else that she was more than capable. When the wheels of the plane touched down smoothly, Zara felt a surge of pride. Jake, though, remained silent, his face unreadable. But Zara didn't care. She knew what she had accomplished. She had just made her first step toward flying above all the doubts, all the obstacles, and no one, could take that away from her. The days following Zara's first solo flight felt like a battle, but one she had fought and won. Yet, in the world of aviation, the victory wasn't always celebrated. When she walked into the hangar for her next scheduled flight, she could feel the weight of the stares that followed her. Some were subtle, some blatant, but they all carried the same message: Zara didn't belong. Jake, now her co-pilot again, had grown quieter, but the tension between them was thick. The air was charged with something unspoken, and Zara could feel it. Every glance, every small comment was a reminder of how difficult her journey would be. As they prepared for the flight, Jake was his usual distant self. Zara double-checked the flight plan and went over the route in her mind. She had done this 1,000 times in training. But nothing could fully prepare her for the environment she was about to step into. "Everything looks good," Zara said as she completed her checks, trying to keep her voice steady. Jake glanced at her, a slight smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "We'll see. Just remember, it's not as simple as just following the plan. Sometimes, you have to think on your feet." Zara didn't let his comment get under her skin. She knew he was trying to undermine her, to show her that she wasn't as experienced as he was. It wasn't the first time, and it wouldn't be the last. As they took off, Zara felt a familiar pressure build in her chest. Flying the plane wasn't the hard part, dealing with the microaggressions. The subtle digs, the unspoken doubt was the real challenge. Jake's body language alone told her that he was waiting for her to make a mistake. Zara fought the impulse to prove him wrong in every move she made. She didn't need to show him up. She didn't need his approval. What she needed was to be herself and do what she had trained to do. But Jake wasn't making it easy. As they flew over the mountains, Zara noticed a slight change in the weather pattern. A storm was brewing on the horizon. She had learned to anticipate these shifts in weather, but Jake's response was less than reassuring. "Don't worry about it," Jake muttered. "We've been through worse." Zara's instinct told her otherwise. The clouds were thickening, and the wind was picking up speed. She had to make a decision. The route they were on could take them right into the storm. "Jake, I'm going to reroute us," Zara said firmly. "We need to avoid that storm." Jake's eyes flickered to her, and for a moment, Zara thought she saw a flicker of doubt in them. But he didn't argue. Instead, he grunted in agreement, but the silence that followed was more telling than anything. As Zara altered the course and communicated the change to air traffic control, she could sense Jake's frustration building. He didn't say anything, but she could feel the weight of his silent judgment. The storm was now visible in the distance, its dark clouds swirling ominously. But Zara had calculated the risk, and the new path she'd chosen was safe. She didn't need anyone's approval, and she didn't need to prove anything to Jake. She was the one in control, and she knew exactly what she was doing. It was during the descent, as they made their approach to the airport, that Jake finally spoke again. "Not bad, Mitchell," he said, his tone begrudging. "I'll give you that." Zara didn't smile. She didn't need his validation. She had done her job, and she had done it well. As the plane touched down smoothly on the runway, Zara couldn't help but feel a small, triumphant spark inside her. She was one step closer to showing everyone, including herself, that she belonged in the cockpit. Jake said nothing else as they taxied to the gate. Zara couldn't shake the feeling that he was still holding on to his prejudices, still not fully convinced that a black woman could be as capable as a white man in the cockpit. But the truth was, Zara didn't need his approval. Not anymore. She was proving herself with every takeoff and every landing. With every flight, she was silencing the doubts and showing the world that she was meant to be up there, at the controls, soaring above the clouds. The days after Zara's flight with Jake passed in a blur. Every moment felt like a test, but Zara was no longer afraid. She had learned that the only approval she needed was her own. The skies, once an intimidating expanse, had become her domain. But even in the cockpit, she still couldn't escape the harsh realities of being a black woman in an industry that seemed determined to keep her grounded. Her new assignment was a big one, a cross-country flight with a different crew. This was the opportunity she had been waiting for, a chance to prove that she wasn't just a competent pilot, but a leader in the cockpit. She walked into the hangar early that morning, carrying her gear bag with determination in her stride. The crew, a mix of seasoned pilots, gave her a quick nod but didn't engage. Zara wasn't surprised. She had long learned that respect wasn't handed to women, especially black women. Her co-pilot this time was Ryan, a young, eager man who hadn't yet fully developed the cynicism that came with years of experience. He didn't look at her with skepticism like Jake had. Instead, Ryan seemed genuinely excited to be working with her, which was a small relief. But Zara didn't have time to let her guard down. She knew the real challenge would be in the air, where she had to prove herself over and over again. As they prepared for takeoff, Zara noticed the subtle glances from the rest of the crew. She could feel their doubt in the way they spoke to her, like she was somehow less capable than the others. It wasn't that they openly doubted her abilities, but the unspoken words were clear. They were waiting for her to slip, waiting for her to show a moment of weakness. Ryan's voice broke through her thoughts. "Zara, we're ready when you are," he said with a smile, his tone friendly and relaxed. It was the kind of attitude Zara had learned to appreciate. He wasn't there to judge her, he was there to work with her. "Let's go," Zara replied, nodding with a calm, focused demeanor. She slid into the captain's seat and went through her checklist with precision, her mind sharp and alert. The takeoff was smooth. The engines roared as the plane ascended into the sky, and Zara felt the familiar thrill of control. This was where she felt most herself, in the cockpit, with the world below her. And nothing but the open sky ahead. Ryan remained quiet for most of the flight, and Zara appreciated the silence. It gave her space to focus, to keep her mind clear. But as they flew over the mountains, a storm began to form on the horizon, dark clouds gathering with a speed that even Zara couldn't have predicted. Zara's heart quickened. She had flown through storms before, but this one looked different. The wind picked up suddenly, and she could feel the turbulence stirring beneath them. "Ryan, we need to adjust course," Zara said, her voice steady but urgent. Ryan didn't hesitate. "Got it," he replied, immediately communicating with air traffic control, but as Zara altered their route to avoid the storm, she noticed the flicker of concern in Ryan's eyes. She could see that he was uncertain about her decisions, uncertain about the storm, and maybe even uncertain about her. "Everything's under control," Zara reassured him, but the storm was close now, and the air felt tense. Suddenly, the turbulence hit. It was like nothing she had ever experienced. The plane shook violently, sending a rush of adrenaline through her body. Zara gripped the controls with both hands, her body steady and controlled, even as the storm tried to throw them off course. Ryan was visibly shaken now. His hands gripped the edge of his seat, and his eyes flicked back to Zara, silently begging for reassurance. "Stay calm, Ryan," Zara said, her voice sharp and commanding. "We're trained for this. Keep your head and do your job." Zara's focus never wavered as she guided the plane through the turbulence. Every shift, every adjustment was calculated. Her confidence grew with each passing moment, and she felt the storm begin to subside as they moved out of its path. The turbulence finally eased, and the skies cleared. Zara's hands slowly released from the controls as she exhaled deeply. Ryan let out a breath too, and a small, amazed smile tugged at the corner of his lips. "You did it," he said, his voice a mix of awe and gratitude. Zara didn't smile. She didn't need to. She knew exactly what she had done. She had taken control of the situation, just like she had done 1,000 times before in her mind. She had faced the storm, both literal and metaphorical, and come out on the other side unscathed. As they landed safely, Zara felt the weight of the journey lift from her shoulders. The crew was waiting on the tarmac as the plane taxied to the gate, and Zara could hear the whispers. But this time, it was different. They weren't whispers of doubt, they were whispers of respect. "Nice work, Captain," one of the crew members said with a nod. Ryan slapped her on the back with a grin. "I think you just earned your place up there." Zara didn't say anything. She didn't need to. She had already proven herself. The next few weeks felt like a series of quiet victories for Zara. She was no longer the uncertain, untested pilot who had to constantly prove herself. She was a force to be reckoned with. But the journey wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Every flight brought a new challenge, a new test of her skill and resolve. And each time, Zara rose to meet it. With each landing, with each takeoff, she silenced the doubts that lingered in the corners of the aviation world. But still, there were moments that reminded her just how far she had to go. On one particular flight, Zara was called in for an impromptu meeting with the head of her airline, Captain Thomas, a man whose reputation in the industry was well known, and not always for the right reasons. Captain Thomas had a long history of making controversial decisions, and his old-school mentality made him one of the toughest figures to impress in the entire company. Zara had heard whispers about him. His opinion of women in aviation was clear. He believed they didn't have the grit or the temperament to handle the demands of the cockpit. The rumors had circulated for years, but Zara was determined not to let them define her. If anyone was going to change his mind, it was her. She walked into his office with confidence, her mind set on the conversation that would follow. Captain Thomas looked up from his papers as she entered, his expression neutral. "Zara, take a seat," he said. Gesturing to the chair in front of his desk, Zara sat, her posture straight, her gaze unwavering. She had spent years fighting for this moment, and she wasn't going to let anyone take it from her. "Captain," she began, keeping her voice firm. "I know the challenges I face being here. I know that I have to prove myself every day, and I'm more than willing to do that." Captain Thomas didn't respond immediately. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. His eyes studied her as though he were measuring her every word. "I'm sure you've heard the rumors," he said finally, his tone a bit colder than she expected. "But I want you to understand something, Zara. Being a pilot isn't just about the skill of flying a plane. It's about the mentality, the ability to handle pressure, to make quick decisions, to lead in high-stress situations. And frankly, I don't believe that women can handle it." Zara felt the weight of his words settle over her. It was the same old story, recycled from every corner of the industry. And it wasn't just about gender, no, it was about race too. Zara had never been blind to the extra burden she carried as a black woman. The road she walked was not only uphill but covered with obstacles that others would never even see, but Zara wasn't about to let him win. "Captain," she said, her voice steady but firm, "I've faced the pressure. I've been in high-stress situations. I've been judged by people who didn't think I could handle it. And yet I'm still here. You don't have to believe me, but I'm not going anywhere. I've earned my place in that cockpit." Captain Thomas didn't react. His face remained unreadable, but for the first time, Zara saw a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. It wasn't much, but it was there. "I'm not here to prove a point," Zara continued. "I'm here to do my job. And I do it better than most of the pilots you've got." There was a brief silence. Zara felt the weight of the moment, the tension between them. But she held her ground. She wasn't asking for his approval, she was demanding his respect. After what felt like an eternity, Captain Thomas finally spoke. His voice was low, but there was a hint of grudging respect in it. "All right, Mitchell. I'll give you a chance. Keep flying the way you are, and maybe I'll change my mind." Zara didn't smile, didn't show any sign of triumph. She had won this battle, but the war was far from over. As she left his office, Zara couldn't help but feel a surge of satisfaction. She had done it. She had taken on one of the most powerful figures in the airline industry and stood her ground, but she wasn't about to rest on her laurels. She knew that this moment was just one small victory in a much larger fight. Later that afternoon, as Zara prepared for her next flight, she felt a shift in the air. The whispers she had once heard in the hangar, the quiet judgment from her colleagues, were starting to fade. Slowly but surely, the men who once doubted her were beginning to acknowledge her skill, her determination, and her unwavering belief in herself. The more Zara flew, the more they realized that she was a force to be reckoned with. No longer just a woman trying to make it in a man's world, she was Zara Mitchell, a pilot who could handle anything the skies threw at her. Zara's reputation had started to shift within the airline. The whispers she had once heard, doubtful, critical, were now quieter. Instead, there was something new, respect. She could feel it in the way her colleagues greeted her in the hangar, in the subtle nods as she passed by, and in the shift in tone when they spoke of her. Zara wasn't just a black woman trying to break into a white-dominated industry, she was Zara Mitchell, a force to be reckoned with in the cockpit. But while the change was happening around her, Zara knew it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Her battle was still being fought every day. The subtle biases still lurked beneath the surface, especially from those who had been in the business long enough to know that change wasn't easy. And even when the storm had passed, it didn't mean the skies were always clear. One afternoon, after another flawless flight, Zara entered the hangar to find a new, unexpected challenge waiting for her. Lyle, the airline's head of operations, had requested to speak with her. Lyle was a man of few words, but his gaze said everything. There was a certain coldness to him, a perception that set him apart from the others. Unlike Captain Thomas, Lyle wasn't one for subtle remarks, he was more direct. And it was that directness that always left Zara feeling uneasy. "You've been flying well," Lyle said, his voice flat as he motioned for her to sit. "But there's something we need to address. We've received several complaints from some of the senior pilots. They don't think you're ready to fly international routes." Zara's heart sank. International flights were a huge step forward in her career, a chance to prove that she wasn't just capable, but exceptional. The thought of being held back again, especially after everything she had done to get here, was almost unbearable. "Who filed the complaints?" Zara asked, her voice steady but her fists clenched at her sides. She wasn't going to let anyone derail her progress. Lyle shrugged, unbothered. "You know how it is. Complaints come in anonymous." Zara was frustrated, but she didn't show it. She had come too far to let these unnamed men dictate her path. "They don't think I'm ready?" Zara repeated, a slight edge to her voice. "Well, I'm more than ready. I've earned the right to fly these routes." Lyle studied her for a moment, his gaze piercing as if he were trying to determine just how much fight she had left in her. "You're a good pilot, Mitchell," he said after a long pause. "But some people in this industry think you're taking opportunities from men who've been here longer. They think you don't belong. And that's the truth." Zara held his gaze, her mind racing. This wasn't about her skills. It was about a system that hadn't evolved to see someone like her as the equal of those who had been given opportunities by virtue of their skin color and gender. The system was still rigged against her, and despite all her achievements, there were always going to be those who tried to hold her down. But Zara wasn't going to let them win. "I belong here because I've earned my place. No one can take that from me," Zara said with quiet authority. "And if you don't think I'm ready for international flights, I'll prove it." Lyle gave her a long, hard look. For a moment, Zara thought he might say something else to challenge her. But instead, he simply nodded. "Fine," Lyle said, his voice cold and dismissive. "Prove it. Take the next international route, then." Zara didn't wait for him to say another word. She stood up, leaving the office without a backward glance, her mind set on the challenge ahead. This was her chance, not just to show Lyle, but to show everyone that she was more than capable of flying internationally, of handling everything this industry threw at her. She would take that route and leave no room for doubt. Over the next few days, Zara focused on nothing but preparation. The route was long, the flight complicated, but she knew this was her moment to break through the barriers that had been placed before her. The flight went off without a hitch. Zara handled every complication with ease, every moment of uncertainty with confidence. She flew the plane with the skill of someone who had been in the skies her entire life. When the plane landed, the crew gathered at the gate, waiting to debrief. They weren't just waiting for a report, they were waiting to see what Zara had made of herself. "Nice work, Mitchell," one of the crew members said. "You handled that like a pro." Zara nodded, her lips pressing into a tight line. She had done it. She had earned her place, and she had proven that no matter what obstacles came her way, she could overcome them. Back in the hangar, the whispers had finally stopped. The men who had once doubted her, who had once thought of her as an outsider, were now silent. Zara had broken through every barrier they had placed in front of her. She had shown them that no amount of bias or prejudice could stop her from doing what she was born to do. The storm had passed. The skies were no longer filled with doubt, and Zara Mitchell was soaring higher than ever before. The months that followed Zara's triumphant international flight were nothing short of remarkable. She had not only proven herself to be a skilled pilot but had also shattered the perception that a woman of color didn't belong in aviation. Her name was no longer whispered behind closed doors, it was spoken with pride, respect, and admiration. Zara's career skyrocketed. She was given more challenging flights, international routes, and leadership roles within the airline. She was no longer fighting for a place at the table, she was helping to build the table for others to join. And with each new achievement, she felt a sense of responsibility to those who came after her, to the women and black individuals who had been told they couldn't achieve the same dreams. One day, Zara stood at the front of a crowded classroom in a prestigious flight school, giving a motivational talk to a group of aspiring pilots. As she spoke, she noticed the young faces looking back at her, their eyes filled with hope and determination. "I'm standing here today because I refuse to let anyone tell me that I couldn't do it," Zara said, her voice strong yet filled with emotion. "I know what it's like to be doubted, to be told that I don't belong. But let me tell you this, you belong. You belong in the cockpit, you belong in the skies, and no one can take that away from you." After her talk, several young women and men approached her, eager to hear more about her journey. Zara could see the spark of possibility in their eyes, the same spark she had once carried. She knew her story was no longer just hers, it belonged to every person who had ever been told they couldn't achieve their dreams. As Zara stood outside the flight school, the wind brushing against her face, she took a deep breath. The sky stretched out before her, endless and full of potential. And she knew, without a doubt, that this was only the beginning. Her legacy wasn't just about the flights she had taken or the challenges she had overcome, it was about the path she had paved for others. Zara had soared above every expectation, and in doing so, she had opened the doors for a new generation of pilots to follow their dreams. No matter their gender or the color of their skin, if you were inspired by Zara's incredible journey, make sure to like, share, and comment below to let us know your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories of resilience, triumph, and breaking through barriers. Together, we can create a world where no dream is too big and no obstacle is too strong.